Hello, my friends. I am Rick, and this is your seat at the table, and we are looking at House Davion, or as I like to pronounce for some 40 years, House Davion of the Federated Suns. Uh, this is the fifth house in the inner sphere, and by most people's accounts, it's the largest, the most successful, and the most potent. But like we said in all the other houses, every house has its weak strengths and weaknesses, and House Davion is no exception. That's some of my miniatures from way back in the day. I started buying these things in the early 80s. This particular one is Raoul Partha in 1986, and Orion, and of course our Warhammer. This one here says 87 on it, stamp 87. And these are all my hand painted jobs, and I've mentioned this a couple times before. I had a huge selection of these things, and this is all that survived except there's a couple more sitting up here on the top of the stereo next to the table. But this is I had probably 4 times this many at one point. The stuff got stuck into storage, and the storage somehow got moved from where it was being stored at my folks' house to the barn, and then before anybody knew it, some woodchucks moved in and tore up the underside of the barn, and they collapsed part of the floor in, which took a number of my boxes of stuff, which should never have been in the barn in the first place, and I never could figure out which one of my worthless relatives had moved them out there. I was very upset. Uh, these are what I was able to dig out of the hole and get out. The rest went deeper down, and I just couldn't get to them. And I'm just terribly upset. I'm not upset now, but I was upset then. I lost an entire section. I had one time the entire battle technology set for the magazine, the new zine, and I only have one issue left. The rest of them were in one of those boxes out there. It got damaged, and weather got to them and stuff like that. So they're hunched back. All these are lead, which you can't get now for good reasons. All right. This is 87, I think. It's either 87 or G7 on that stamp. It's real hard to read. And a little hover tank. And this just says Raoul Partha. I can't see what the particular date is on that one. But anyway, House Davion is, by all considerations, one of the more successful houses, or by their own estimates anyway. It's believed that the majority of the population is a kind of a mixture of British and French. Although I don't have any way to really judge that because they don't speak like Brits and they don't speak like French, and there's no definite uh, specific language. Or if you go to House Korea, Japanese is spoken quite heavily. Chinese is spoken heavily in House Liao. There's a lot of, like I said, Scandinavian and German spoken in House Steiner, but for the majority of people, they speak English. And it's the common tongue of the inner sphere and has been for hundreds of years. So the Federated Suns is the strongest militarily speaking to a point. The weakness for their military is they're spread out. The house has got so much territory to cover that it's not possible for them to be everywhere at one time. And the limitations of the supply chain also causes problems. Another weakness of House Davion, once again, is its size. Is so many of its worlds are literal backwater worlds. Even in the core of the Federated Suns, there are many planets which everybody would be considered almost a periphery style of lifestyle. The wealth and industry is concentrated on a smaller number of planets and systems, and the largest population bases are also in these core systems or these major systems. This makes them tantalizing targets for their enemies, and the need to be better defended to tie down more defensive troops to protect those locations also is part of the issue. The other side of that is that there's such a, of all the houses, there's such a disparity amongst both the wealth and education in the Federated Suns, though they try to downplay this. It is not uncommon for many, many worlds to be at sixth grade level education because once again just the sheer size and the way things are concentrated in smaller number of key systems makes that a problem. The Federated Suns also has a long border with House Krita and equally long border with House Liao, and both of these houses are aggressive in their own ways and have been problems for the Davions for, well, ever since the conception. And this means that for the most part they have a pretty nasty enemy on both sides of them, so they're flanked, and it's just luck and the fact that House Liao and House Krita's philosophies and mindsets are completely opposite of each other, that they never got together to work together to gang up on the Federated Suns, which could have been a bad day for House Davion. If you look at House Steiner has the Cretans on one side, which is a problem, but they have the Free Worlds League on the other side, and for the majority of the time, most part, the Free Worlds League is not much of an issue as a serious threat because they're constantly embroiled in their own internal problems. The same goes to House Liao. House Liao has the Free Worlds League on one side. Once again, it mostly keeps to itself and occasionally does some stupid things or gets froggy and makes an attempt at something aggressive. But usually the houses, House Merrick is usually hamstrung by all the internal squabbling and external factors that outside their control. Where House Krita, one of the reasons House Krita is as strong as they are, militarily speaking, is because they're like the Federated Suns in this aspect, as they have some very concentrated, powerful foes on either side of them, and this puts them in between a situation. So, had it later on in the series when the Federated Commonwealth merges or becomes the Fed Commonwealth, when Steiner and Davion make this bid and they open up the Fourth Succession War, had House Liao not been the target, but House Krita and both Steiner and the Federated Suns had hammered into House Krita, House Krita would have been in a much worse situation than it turned into. There's a lot of factors involved, and eventually we'll get to those things. A lot of players, from my experience, favor House Davion. This is the cool kids. This is the cool house. This is the one everybody wants to be a member of or belong to. I mean, that's just the general consensus for a lot of people. I'm not saying that's because I've played every house. I've played at the role-playing table from MechWarrior version and at the battle table on the Battlefront side of representing every one of the houses. The trick for doing things like that, of course, is if you have a favored house and you prefer operating that way with that particular house's arms and colors and things like this, you have a tendency to understand the mindset, philosophy, and the military ego of that particular house, and you'll play it that way. When you tend to favor another house and you find yourself playing, if you're House Davion and that's to your core, and you want to play and suddenly find yourself representing House Liao, sometimes it's hard to divorce yourself from the tactics and mindsets that the house you favor and try to, otherwise you're going to play House Liao as if it's House Davion, and you're really missing out. I think that you really should not do that in my mind, but that's the individual character thing. So when we're looking at House Davion, and I don't remember, this had to be in the mid-80s when I got it, 1988, right? So we talk about the introduction. In every society, you'll find dualism of man and his works. There's no good without evil, no civilization without barbarism, no life without death. The inevitable correction of humanity from primitive culture to advanced techno society is, in fact, but half the truth. For the forces that would tear down these bastions of progress are no less inevitable. In the end, history is not so much a chronicle of years as a story of cycles. Perhaps the ancients recognized this best with their stories of Armageddon, Ragnarok, and nuclear holocaust. But they reckoned without the turn of the wheel that it will start the whole cycle over once more. Dr. Ernest Meyer, Shadows of the Future, ComStar Publications, Terra 3024. The Federated Suns is one of the largest, most powerful of successor states, along with the Draconis Combine, stands as a dominant influence in the politics of the military strategies of the 31st century. Indeed, few objective observers dispute the fact that these two interstellar states are most likely all the successor powers to achieve the elusive goal of reunification of the inner sphere, which has been at the root of the seemingly endless wars of the modern era. Federated Suns is the largest alliance of the inner sphere, comprising over 500 inhabited star systems spread out over some 20,000 square parsecs of space. And it's this size that gives Hanse Davion preeminence in the human-occupied space. Beginning as a loose collection of 20 worlds over 700 years ago, it's been one of the most stable of the political bodies in explored space, although occasionally plagued by internal disruptions and often heavily involved in wars with its two neighboring states, the Draconis Combine and the Commonwealth Confederation. Federated Suns has managed to grow and prosper through most of its long and eventful history. Yet no other successor state has been as badly hurt by the loss of technology during the succession wars. In some ways, its economic condition might be summed up as a few overdeveloped worlds in an underdeveloped realm. The Davion government has therefore placed a high priority on scientific research, which may spell trouble for ComStar in the future. So, as I started out kind of poorly, Hanse Davion's strengths are its size, its stability, its solid leadership and core military mindset. It's well-trained military, and more important, it's very well-trained command staff. Many of the weaknesses of the house is, once again, its sheer size, the amount of poor worlds and disenfranchised places within it. There's also like every house, every interstellar nation state in the inner sphere and beyond, the Federated Suns has divisions within it. It has its neo-nobility system as well, and there are several major minor houses if you want to look at it from this place. The Sorensen family and on the Draconis reach, or the Draconis side of the Federated Suns, and the Hassocks on the Leal side. And as of circa 3025, Hanse Davion becomes the leader of his house and of the Federated Suns. Originally, he was the second born, and his brother Ion was the leader, and he dies in a conflict or a military venture against the Draconis Combine, and basically Hanse is suddenly elevated to a position he wasn't totally prepared for or totally trained for. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because Hanse Davion is actually much slicker. His brother was more military mindset and a little bit more rigid, from what little we know of Ion. Hanse, on the other hand, it was nicknamed the Fox for a good reason, because he's always trying to think outside the box. He's also very conscious of the fact that everybody else is doing the same thing, and he's always trying to keep one step ahead of both his friends and his opposition, his enemies. The second or third weakness of the house is its poor economy. They're not poor by any means, but if you want to rank Federated Suns in the hierarchy of the five houses, economically speaking, they would probably be number 4 or potentially number 5. The Draconis Combine is actually poorer, economically speaking, of the 5 houses, the poorest of the 5 houses, in my opinion. But the Federated Suns is a second close runner-up, and in part because once again, they don't have this heavily developed industrial bases, say House Steiner and House Merrick, they also have much further to go to move things around. That's a kind of a unspoken issue in BattleTech when it comes to stellar transportation. Talk about jump ships specifically. And in this particular book, they claim there's about 2,000 jump ships in the entire inner sphere, with about 17% being held by mercenaries, 40% being part of the merchant fleets of the various houses, leaving the balance in the house of the control of the houses. There's some problems I have with that, and I probably don't need to bring it up here too much, but it plays an important role. First off, I think 2,000 is ridiculously low. It doesn't, in my mind. If you see some of these planets, there's trillions and trillions and trillions of people in the inner sphere, and there are many planets with billions. That's with a B, multiple B populations with heavy industrial base, heavy needs for commerce and things like this. So the breakdown, and then you have to take into account there's only roughly 2,000 jump ships existing in the years 3025, that at least 10% of that has to belong to Prefery, whether it's the Prefery, the little houses, the minor houses, the independents, and the pirates, and so on and so forth. So I figured, okay, if we knock out 10% of that, and then you have to break them all down. So in this case, there would be roughly 306 jump ships in the control of mercenary units, 720 jump ships in control of merchants or companies, and 774 jump ships controlled by the main houses, and that's removing 10% from the original 2,000. So if you break it down, the fact that that's for all the houses, you have to divide that by 5, and of course that's going to vary between which houses got what, but roughly each house would have approximately 34 mercenary-owned jump ships, 80 merchant-owned jump ships, and 86. No, yeah, roughly 80. Did I break that down right? No, I guess I didn't. What is that? Yeah, that's right. So roughly 86 jump ships. So the given house would have approximately, no, I stand corrected. They would have approximately 144 merchant ships, and the house fleets would have approximately 148 jump ships. So combined, the average house would have about 392 jump ships. And this is for, in this case, they're going to have 300 odd jump ships to keep the economy, the supplies, and move military and people around the Hanse Davion over 500 planets. I find that ridiculously low. It says right there that the production of jump ships is minute compared to what it was in the height of the Star League. So this first succession war devastates the jump ship manufacturing capabilities of all parties. Everybody takes one in the backside very badly, and they never recover from it. So at most, there's about a dozen or so new jump ships produced every year across the inner sphere, and we don't include ComStar because that's not part of that equation, but they're not going to be in much better shape either. The ridiculous idea that the economy alone dictates the sheer amount of raw material resources that need to move around. It's just not plausible that a couple hundred jump ships is all that's available. And then we go to the novels and stories and in game stuff where we talk about moving vast amounts of military units around, and people going everywhere, and then private individuals owning their own jump ships and things like this. I think the number of jump ships is probably three times what they estimated originally, and I got some ideas as to why they did that, but I'll save that for when I review that particular book, which won't be today. So when the fourth succession breaks out, this need for this crucial Achilles heel of all the houses, this lack of transport, forces Hanse Davion and his commanders to strip most of his merchant fleet rent, borrow, impress, however you want to look at it, these merchant ships into transporting the military units that are needed to do such a vast invasion of House Liao, and more importantly, to sustain it with logistics to move some supply and replacements and things like this, and to create these command circuits, these jump circuits that they use for communicating. This also becomes a problematic later on when, 100 years later, when the so-called Dark Ages breaks loose, where they lose the HPG network. Majority of the way to communicate amongst your peers and amongst your own control houses, your own military units, is by jump ship. So to me, I just think they woefully underestimated the amount of jump ships available. But this issue causes an economic problem for Hanse Davion on a regular basis, because there's just only so much transport capacity abound, and the more planets you control, and the fact that they're further apart, the harder it is to keep your basics supplied. So that there are entire planets that don't have enough water resources, and they're dependent on water being shipped in. There's factories that determine or demand lots of resources that have to be shipped in, and then their products shipped out. I mean, it plays its role, right? Among other things. The other thing sometime about Hanse Davion, it's hubris, its own belief in it being superior to everybody else, and sometimes that leads them to overextend themselves or overreach in depending on who's in charge of things. Hanse Davion is pretty good about not doing that. His son Victor, on the other hand, becomes very embroiled in the greater picture of the fight against the clans, and eventually it costs him, his position. His sister basically steals the throne out from under him, and then the dissolution of the Federated Commonwealth. I mean, it is what it is, but that's another set of things from its time. So, says here, all the successor states, the Federated Suns makes the most of keeping alive the principles of democracy and promoting the cause of personal freedoms, and takes a highly pragmatic view of the matter. Prince Hanse Davion, the current House leader, believes that whether government is free or totalitarian, it must spend about the same amount of energy to maintain order, either by taking pains to protect its citizens' rights or by creating agencies to suppress those rights. Prince Davion reasons that there is more to be gained in loyalty and patriotism by protecting the people's rights than by opposing or oppressing them. However, the Dakota's Combine is no more evil because it is generally perceived as brutal, repressive police state then the Federated Suns image automatically makes it good. Like all human endeavors, the Federated Suns has its strengths and weaknesses, and owes much of what it is now to its political and social evolution through history. Okay. So outward appearances may suggest the Federated Suns is a champion of democratic freedoms. Realities are not so simple. Like other interstellar states that have survived the chaos of post-League War and the continuing de-evolution of social and economic order, the Federated Suns has been forced to adopt expediencies rather than cling to idealism. If a democracy was ever the ideal of the Federated Suns, and there are those who would dispute this, it certainly has been forced to give way to the harsh light of necessity. Led by a warrior aristocracy locked in constant wars over territory, this realm would not appear much different than other states to an unbiased observer. The fact that the idealism once counted for so much and still forms the mainstay of its government propaganda effort may still be more damning than any other fact. Looking back at the Federated Suns' history, however, starting even before the crucial fact that marked the political beginnings of the realm, it's hard to see how it could develop differently, given all the factors that shape man's patterns in the third millennium. So, we got our history. So this is roughly it took humankind some 200 years to evolve from a relatively primitive planet-bound race to a spacefaring empire over 1,000 colony worlds. The greatest irony of the succession wars is that in mere 2 centuries of warfare, the human sphere has taken enormous strides backward instead of forward, etc., etc. So if you combine all the houses of the inner sphere, there's roughly 1,900 settled systems divided amongst 5 houses. And like I said, I speculate there's probably twice that many of non-officially settled worlds or little colonies and mining outfits and so on and so forth, but roughly 1,900 worlds. And if we go back to that merchant or the jump ship equation thing, that would roughly mean there's approximately one jump ship for every planet in the inner sphere. And I still find it highly problematic. But if you look at the sheer size of things, prior to the Star League, humanity was on an ever expanding outward mindset, and this is why the periphery has many smaller communities and independent worlds and stuff out there that's not considered and not counted often when we talk about intersphere stuff. So there's probably another 500 or 600 worlds beyond the official intersphere boundaries. So there's probably 2,500. If you include clan space, you might be pushing 3,000 settled systems total. And most of those were settled before or during the Star League. Since once the Star League collapsed, and the exception of the clan exodus, or the SLDF exodus become the clans, the inner sphere has not really grown much in the 300 odd years of conflict. The fact is that they haven't expanded other than taking territory from each other. So the fact that the galaxy is vast, and there's huge resources and planets and systems still out there laying untapped, but none of our houses have really progressively continued to expand outward, in part because the limits of the ability to move things around. This is one of the reasons our feudal system isn't in play. It's just not possible to, with the distance it takes for communications to get between worlds, and the lack of sufficient jump ship traffic. Once again, this is one of the things that sets the BattleTech universe apart from other science fiction games. A lot of places you just do not have the ships are not common. They're fairly rare, and they're expensive, and they're slow. That was another part. You don't have the warp speed. You don't have hyperspace. You have this jump field and instantaneously moving from place to point A to point B, but you're limited by the maximum of 30 light years. So if you've got a house where many of your planets are 40 and 50 light years apart, you're going to might have to take 2 jumps to get something from here to there. So that limits the expansion and their ability to control that expansion. But it also forces them back to basically similar situation to what we face on Earth today. There's only a limited amount of resources and room to expand, and pretty much every place that any worth having has been settled and claimed. So what's left? You fight over each other for what little bit of gain. That's another reason why we don't have world empires today, because World War I, World War II. It just explained it. I mean, you can't take ground from your neighbors anymore, not without causing a much greater problem. This is one of those key factors of what makes this game different from other games, in my opinion. All right, so we got our history, and there's a lot of history. We could spend hours just going over each individual house's early days and what it took to get to where they are, and how they got to where they are, and the whys and what forth. I mean, it's just not plausible to do. I mean, as it is, these house reviews have gotten to where they run in about an hour, and that's including even with my occasional tirades and rants about this, that, and the other thing. So Death of a Tyrant, Forgotten Davion, November Conspiracy, A New Order, Principality, First Prince, Military Security, The Black Prince, Against All Odds, Lady in a Wheelchair, Women of the 25th Century, William's Affair, Regency, Civil War, Regents of War, Alexandria Escapes. I mean, it just goes on and on. So, right, and Under the Star League, Century of Peace, Troubles with Terraforming. get into that one. It just gets off on a weird tangent. War of the Davion Succession, Executive Order 156, Amherst's grave, First Succession War. Yeah, we could do a whole video on each succession war based on each house's view of it and how it participates. You know, here's the Second Succession War. Overtures of Peace. I mean, this is one of the things about Federated, or about BattleTech. We could literally be doing videos for a decade and not run out of material. I mean, the Third Succession War, there's a load of stuff. A little Private War, creation of a model army, aid from afar, back warrior life. Cabal. Michael's treachery. See, we're getting into the current lane of stuff. So here we talk about the Hound. They call our new prince the Hound, and I must say that it's not label is not far from the mark. He's a kind of expression you might associate with a faithful old hunting dog. Those large, sad eyes and nose just a little too big for his face. Of course, real source of the nickname is his character. Ian Davion has the tenacity and determination of a bloodhound on the trail, and I don't think he'll give up an idea if all the mechs from here to Lucian stood in his way. So we talk about a little bit about Hanse Davion, and then the rise of Hanse Davion. So Michael Hanse, who took the name Hanse Davion after the marriage, was even more clever than either his father or Duke Sandoval. By the time he was 27, his influence was already as great as theirs. From 3005 to 3013, Michael Hanse Davion held considerable authority in political diplomatic operations, leading 3 separate ministries while at the zenith of his power. Hanse Davion was both ambitious and unscrupulous, however, and his methods offended those who believed in ethics and government. One of these was Hanse Davion, who disliked Michael from the first time they met. Hanse was kept busy with training, however, and he was given a military command on the Draconis front. In Draconis March in 3007, these dudes removed him as a major factor in the court politics for the rest of Ian's reign. During Hanse Davion's period of political authority, House Liao managed to lure Wolf's Dragons out of the Federated Suns' employ. This was probably not Hanse Davion's intention, but it's symptomatic of how his misuse of authority was taking its toll. At that time, he had been encouraging the minions at various levels of administration to divert funds and supplies to nobles from whom he was seeking favors. The Dragoons must have felt such diversion of supplies and funds keenly, and it would have contributed to a desire to move on. Indeed, this kind of corruption within House Davion administrative ranks led to the general decline of the military prowess, despite the efforts of Prince Ian to do everything but fight battles single-handedly. So, one of the biggest problems in 3025 and in the next decade or so, leading up to the Fourth Succession War, is Michael Hanse Davion's constant maneuvering and political attempts. He believes he should have been the heir to the prince's chair, the throne, and not Hanse. And then when Hanse becomes the heir, Michael Hanse is declared the heir apparent until the marriage between Melissa Steiner and Hanse Davion takes place, and they have Victor, which then puts that down. By that time, Hanse Davion, who always suspected Michael of being a treasonous SOB, actually gets enough proof and concocts a method to use that to his advantage and to discredit Michael, and then eventually Michael has an incident that's blamed on House Liao. Right? Just the way things kind of have to play out in here. So we talk about the fox. Can it be a coincidence that leaders who are able to see the value of diplomacy, even alliances, should arise in all 5 houses simultaneously? During the past decade, the Federation has taken the first definite steps towards ending the long stalemate of the succession wars. Under the rule of Hanse Davion, the Federated Suns, Federation has enjoyed more social, economic, technical, and military recovery than 2 centuries before him. Even the enemies of House Davion have been forced to label this period of Renaissance in Federated Suns culture. The past decade has also been critical for the whole Intersphere, which now stands on the brink of either peace or another bloody round of warfare. So we go into a number of things. That first off, Hanse is very clever. He's nicknamed the Fox for a damn good reason, and he's always trying to think ahead of everybody else. Sometimes several steps ahead of everybody else, but he also can see through a wall. If you want to get the idea, he can look and he gets the idea. He's not stupid by a minute, and that works to his advantage a lot in most aspects. Is probably the most successful Davion in 200 years. All right. A second thing that Hanse Davion recognizes is that the state of technology in the Intersphere is in very bad shape. And even before the discovery of the Helm memory core by the Great Death Legion, Hanse Davion initiates this concept called the New Avalon Institute of Science. It's basically this giant think tank, university, school, you name it, to give a big boost and kick science in the backside. This whole concept that what we don't know, what the House leadership don't know, is ComStar played a big role in helping keep technology on the decline, and not, and that's for another day. That's a whole other book by itself. So this creation of the NAIS is a huge thing. It's also, because of it, it forces his neighbors, his rivals, to try to emulate them. So the Draconis Combine, House Liao, they all make an attempt at creating their own version of this. It's just they don't have the resources or the mindset. More importantly, this belief in cultivating and encouraging science and development and technology. Sounds familiar today to some degree, depending on who you want to talk to. We want to talk about politics. So this makes a huge impact in the next few decades. It really does a grand across the board, everything from medicine to space travel to weapon design and construction. So see, where is it here? Prince Andrew, the Starlink Area University, housing a huge unopened vault, realized how important the concept of that vault might be. Hanse rushed ahead with the raid plans, decided to personally lead the attack. What the prince had thought would be an in-and-out affair turned into a month-long battle. Luck was with the young prince, however. He and his troops managed to not only destroy Korea's supply center on Halstead Station, but to seize the Halstead collection, perhaps the most important Starlink treasure yet discovered. Prince Davion's mechs broke into the vault. He and his men found rows and rows of books and computer memory cubes. Hanse and his troops carried off as many of the books as time would permit, burning what they could not carry. Unofficial sources say that over 3,000 books and other materials were taken from the vault, most of them highly technical subjects. Books provided, consider just how crucial Starlink knowledge would be to every house. The fact that they burned what they couldn't take, while sounds great, it's actually, in my mind, a very foolish, stupid thing to do. It would have been better even if it fell into the hands of their enemies, for that knowledge and technology options to still be available, because you could either come back later and try and steal them again, or steal what you couldn't take, or steal the information that the other house is able to open up from those books. That's just my opinion. Books proved to be so significant that the public hailed the prince as the victor of Halstead Station. Capitalizing on this public admiration, he unveiled the plans for the creation of the new Avalon Institute of Science. Today, the Halstead collection is housed in the NASA in an environmentally controlled library. Researchers have not yet mined the full wealth of knowledge contained within the collection, but much of it the basis for the NASA's ability to recover some lost knowledge and technology. Prince Hanse has made most of the information available for public use. Some of the material is even part of the university data. Prince Hanse seems to be a peaceful man who believes that everyone, even the lowliest citizen, deserves to reap the benefits of knowledge. So the fact they destroyed what they couldn't carry off, this kind of puts light to that. He should not have done that. They should have let it. What they couldn't take, they should have left and let the Creeders burn it, because they probably would have. Strategic moves. If they wouldn't have, ComStar damn well should have, would have. Future of the Federation. Social political structure. Government should never be static, inflexible creations of people any more than a person should have a static, inflexible personality. The best governments have proven to be quick and decisive in dealing with outside threats, yet cautious and contemplative in dealing with the affairs of its own people. From the political philosophies of the Davion family by blah blah. It says, let the Davions worry how many stars fly on the sunburst. I worry about how few coins there are in my pockets and how many rocks are in my field. A common saying among the people of Federated Suns. Introduction. Individual freedoms versus the need to follow natural leaders has been a central issue facing the people and government of the Federated Suns since its founding. Should the government bow to the wishes of citizens who believe the government is a servant of the people's individuality, or should the people suspend their rights to follow men and women with superior leadership abilities? In the Federated Suns, these questions have been answered by a political system that is, on the surface at least, an absolute monarchy. Though a monarchy might imply the common citizen has forfeited his rights in Davion realm, the common person can make himself heard in several official and unofficial ways. Commoners have come to acknowledge the wisdom of the Davion family in most great matters affecting the Federated Suns. The prince, aided by his family, holds enormous power and generally receives the wholehearted support of most of the population. In return for their support, the common people expect to enjoy certain personal freedoms on the local level. By laws and unwritten agreements, the common folk of the Federated Suns may participate in the decisions of their local governments. This protects the average person against possible excesses of the local nobility, which then would affect them more directly than the larger questions occupying all the minds of the Davions on far-off New Avalon. No one has ever resolved the debate as whether citizenry or nobility won the compromise, but neither can anyone deny that the decisive leadership of the Federated Suns central government is what made it the strongest realm in the intersphere today. So we talk about the nobility. Barons and baronesses, the Crucius Pact, rights of appeal, count and countesses. The public of the Federated Suns think very little. Rising up and deposing a noble has not proven himself worthy of his position. The two most common ways are the public appeal or direct action, which has happened on more than one occasion. You get a noble that's excessively bad, you might find that noble might find himself running for the hills if they're lucky. The principality, the highest power of the Federated Suns, of course, is the first prince. Indeed, the first prince of the Federated Suns is maybe the most powerful person in the inner sphere. About the ruling family, battlefield royalty, the royal court, various councils and ministries, planetary governments. Planetary governments are of many types and styles. Some are patterned after governments from the history of terrorists, such as Russian communism or French socialism. Other planetary governments are bold experiments in the governmental theory, such as the electric democracy of Torrance or the representative commune system of Xena. The average planet in the Federated Suns is ruled by a manner similar to the old British parliamentary system. No matter what type of government is closely joined with and often depends on the noble aristocratic, How tightly nobles control the government tends to depend on the world and the noble families. Many noble families are content to deal only with interplanetary affairs or with the management of their lands, which allows the planetary government a great deal of latitude. Other noble families believe that their title authorizes them to completely dominate a world government. Needless to say, these noble families are seldom popular with the citizens or the Federation government, which needs a well-liked nobility to help it govern properly. Overt political goals. interstellar relations with the Free Worlds League, compelling confederation. So at 30, as of 3025, Hanse Davion and Steiner start hatching this series of detentes and meetings, and they open trade with each other. They start trading ideas and military expertise and production. The fact that the vast economic powerhouse of the Lyran Commonwealth could easily be devoured by the economically hungry Federated Suns, where the Federated Suns can give and helps with the Lyran Commonwealth's military and helps them to develop a better command structure, and more importantly to be more successful in the battlefield. But the most key piece there is this proposed marriage between Katrina's daughter Melissa and Hanse Davion. Hanse Davion is 40, and Melissa Steiner is 18. She turns 18 when they get married, just before they're married. So, it's definitely this potential political Congress of joining these two powerful houses, each one bringing to the table that badly needed components that the other side lacks, right? And the combined Federated Commonwealth becomes an extremely powerful force, but extremely unstable one, and it has many problems and eventually disintegrates in a civil war. So you can see the writing on the wall. Once the prime movers and shakers, Katrina Steiner and Melissa Steiner and Hanse Davion are no longer able to affect or are dead, then if you don't have the powerful people that run things, things don't necessarily run the way they ought to, and things can deteriorate pretty fast. So, here's Melissa Steiner, picture of her. The covert political goals, Milo. Now, there's a reason why, to talk about the Relations Commonwealth referee, ComStar. Milo is the Ministry of Intelligence Investigations and Operations. Now, I haven't really touched on any of the various houses, Secret Service, Special Services, or whatever you want to call it, their spy networks and stuff, because we actually have a book that's dedicated to those resources, to those agencies, and I'm in the process of slowly rereading the book myself, and I will do a video at some point, and we will go into much more depth on the individual secret or special services from each house. So in the case of the Milo, or MIIO, name given to various departments, secret agencies within the Davion government, is the most effective one of all the houses. The most effective. Not necessarily the most effective in a broad sense of the way, because perhaps the most dedicated and the most driven would be the ISF of the Draconis Combine, because they are very powerful and they're very good at what they do, but they have a much more geared for controlling their own space and their own people than outwardly, whereas Milo does a good job of policing its own people, and more importantly, keeping an eye on everybody that needs to be kept on, but working against everybody outside too. And for intelligence gathering, information purposes, and things like that, the Milo's top dog. You want special strike team kind of stuff. You want the ISF. They're much harder to beat when it comes to doing things like really nasty stuff. I mean, each house's Secret Service has its own weaknesses and strengths, just like the houses do. And everybody, safe is the worst. Of course, Rewards League. For a number of reasons. They're the worst until the clans show up. And the clans intelligence service is far worse than safe. Makes safe look like Milo in comparison. But once again, we'll deal with that in its own book. So we got Prince Hanse Davion, the Federated Suns nobility, the commoners, says the most common persons are often more involved in the actions of the vast Federated Suns than are the nobles of their world. Planetary governments are notorious for complaining and demonstrating either for or against federated policy. Although these local actions have no official power, they are noticed by the prince and the Davion family and often result in change of some especially unpopular law. By the actions of the public are never coordinated to the point of actually threatening the government of the Federated Suns. The current interest of the general public has been towards the recent alliance between their realm and the Lyran Commonwealth. Many are impatiently looking forward to a better economy because of the alliance, while some fear the realm will be overwhelmed by the vastly superior manufacturing ability of the Commonwealth. Whatever the belief, the public and the Federated Suns have been eyeing their neighboring realm's economy and debating over every change for better or for worse. Strengths and weaknesses. The current political system, the Federated Suns, has stood for at least a century without major change. Although the public is sharply divided between rich and poor worlds, all seem to be generally content with the performance of the Davion family. The nobility system is in a society of the Federated Suns has proven to be capable in attracting good planetary leaders and gives those leaders enough power to do their job. This nobility system, while strong and strictly defined, is flexible enough that the average citizen can hope to become a noble through hard work and skill. In a kind of reverse corollary, people can have an incompetent noble removed from power. Although the process is almost unforgivably slow, it does exist. People's right to call down a noble actually protects the nobility as a whole because it prevents people from being so frustrated they overturn the whole apple cart. The one major weakness of the political system of the Federated Suns is the sharp contrast between the poor worlds and the rich ones. The Davion government cannot afford to let the less developed planets become too dissatisfied because so many of them possess untapped resources. Recent official policies such as Prince Davion's call for prairie exploration and the proposed creation of a prairie march show the political significance that these worlds have taken in recent years. The more imminent danger to the political system is the approaching showdown between Hanse Davion and Duke Michael Hanse Davion. House Davion is aware most, if not all, of Duke Hanse's ploys to gain power and win control of the throne, so it is something of a mystery that he has not confronted the Duke directly. Perhaps the prince realizes open conflict within the royal family would do the Federated Sons more harm than good. See, the fox, he's got a plan. Yes, he does. Give him enough rope. Religion. You'll notice that every house has got significant religion, and there's an entire chapter devoted to the concept of religion and how it interacts within the world. So that's a layover from our current times. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, the unfinished book movement, strengths and weaknesses. Federated Suns shares with the Lyran Commonwealth to a lesser extent the Free Worlds League the boon and bane of religious freedom. On the positive side, the freedom to worship, as one believes, is a crucial factor in helping citizenry feel free and unoppressed by the government. Freedom of worship also promotes an open culture able to accept and discuss new ideas and changes without fear. On the dark side, there's always a specter of religious conflict. At times of stress and uncertainty, common people, especially uneducated, often feel impotent. At such times, they can lash out in frustration at the nearest minority. Once a religious conflict occurs, it takes years to heal the wounds. The other disadvantage of religious freedom is that it becomes impossible to gain support for a cause by claiming it is God's will. Diversity of religion guarantees a diversity of opinions on almost every subject, and it's futile to attempt to stir up the emotions of the realm with scripture, as so many past leaders have done. Indeed, a few Davion princes have tried and failed miserably. Right? That's something we can learn in our own modern times. Religion's all great and fine, but you know what? There's no one dominant religion, and the fact is everybody has their own opinions, and by trying to play off each other with that sort of stuff, it just causes more problems than it solves. It just does. So the military forces. The armed forces of the Federated Suns is the largest military force in the sphere, capable of fielding over 110 battle mech regiments, and many times that number armored aerospace, infantry, and support units. Regiments of the AFFS are reasonably well equipped with a wide variety of weapon systems, and every soldier's training emphasizes wits and intuition. So one of the many reasons that the Federated Suns military is top dog is, one, they perfected and embraced combined arms combat. They routinely utilize all their field assets together, and each one in their proper niche and in a supporting role with each other. They have a really good military command structure. The officers, for the most part, are well educated and experienced and encouraged to improvise or to be mindful that battlefields are fluid and situations change. The plan is a plan only until it hits the enemy, and then it becomes something else. And if you can rewrite the plan on the fly as you need to, you're going to have a much greater chance of success than other houses. In some cases, the plan falls apart. The whole situation follows. And so, in the case like the Draconis Combine, when the Karitas high rank and file are not encouraged to think on their own or to improvise. They're not encouraged to become flexible. If their command structure becomes disrupted, then so does the entire campaign. So same operation. There's similar issues with House Liao. House Liao's military is very good at what they do for the most part, but once again, so much infighting and backbiting and backstabbing and internal politics takes place that they have to be constantly aware of not just the people below them, of the people above them, but the people to the left and to the right of them. And their individual soldiers and stuff will bite tooth and nail until they decide they don't want to, and then it's another situation. And we can even get into it with the Free Worlds League. Once I said, the Free Worlds League is military is damn good when it's allowed to do what it's supposed to do, but they're hamstrung constantly by bickering and internal fighting, usually because they can't get the material, the supplies they need on time. They can't come to a consensus on something. Unless, of course, they're facing an opponent that's coming onto their turf, and then it's open season. And how Steiner's forces are lackluster in part because there's just too many, armchair generals that believe they know how to fight a war and lead men who've never truly done so, except in a ballroom, and the troops know it. And troops don't see any point in sacrificing themselves or thinking outside the box if there's not going to be a follow-up on it. So on the individual situation, they can be quite effective and clever, but they're limited because there's no follow-through or follow-up. Now, Federated Suns military, on the other hand, has got all this stuff together for the most part and figured out. The only downside occasionally is hubris. Sometimes they think too much of themselves and will put themselves out somewhere and then get their head cut off or get an arm cut off because they misjudged the situation or the determination of their foe, or is what it is. But for the most part, they're very good, and they use all their resources to their advantage as often as possible. Another thing is that of all the militaries, it's one of the most well balanced. While they still have issues with assault, not having as many assault mechs and heavy mechs as they would like to have, but they have quite a few medium-sized mechs on the heavy side that compensate for this, and they understand the use and tactics of each weight class very well, and they're trained to understand it and utilize the best as often as possible. So use your stuff to their best effect is whenever you can, right? The other downside for them is, of course, is just the sheer amount of territory that they got to protect and cover. That's back to that issue of transportation and distance, right? So in the vastness Federated Suns, the AFS military bureaucracy is amazingly swift responding needs of its forces, whilst officers are trained in the Federated Sun academies are perhaps the best educated and certainly most daring in the inner sphere. These factors make the AFS not only the largest but the best fighting force among the 5 successor states. Despite these advantages, the AFS is still too small to do much more than keep the forces of the Draconis Combine, the compelling Confederation at bay. The occasional effort to siege a world, the periodic raid, or the rare offensive has always been the extent of its offensive capability in the last few decades. This inability to take the fight to the enemy is frustrating to the enlisted men as their officers, for both groups are highly motivated to prove their worth. Biggest disadvantage that the AFFS must overcome is the vastness of the Federated Suns. The extent of the realm with its incredibly long borders means that units must defend huge volumes of space. To mount an offensive means the High Command must take troops away from the defense, leaving those who remain behind to watch over even larger volumes of space. The chances for disaster are many. Many a field marshal has lost sleep over the fear of finding his offensive outflanked and the enemy pouring into the Federated Suns from behind. The recent alliance between the Suns and the Commonwealth may have helped alleviate this problem of distance versus available manpower. Now the AFFS has a strong, though sometimes inept ally in the Commonwealth. They can share intelligence and other kinds of assistance that make the Federated Suns offensive more feasible. So in one way or another, any action by this highly trained and motivated military will be affect the destiny of the other four great houses of the inner sphere. So the structure, their high command, Cronus and Capellan March regional commands, combat theater commands, ranks, Department of Military Education, Department of Army and Navy. Perhaps the best educated military in the entire inner sphere is the Federated Suns military. And they encourage that education. They continually encourage that education as you go up in ranks, as you're 10 years longer you stay in the service, the more educated you'll get. And they at all levels, even the lowest trooper can come out of his time with his or her time with the AFFS with a significant education to fall back on. Typical forces, frontline regimental combat teams. So, ever since the Second Succession War, the AFFS has combined most of the major mech regiments with regiments from other service branches to support them. Together, these groups form regimental combat teams, or RCTs. These usually make up of an RCT as follows: 1 battle mech regiment, 3 armored regiments, 1 heavy, 2 medium, 5 infantry regiments, which include 1 jump, 2 mechanized, 2 regular, 1 artillery battalion, and 2 aerospace fighter wings, 1 regular regimental, 1 independent. Of course, in this universe of diminishing supplies, actual composition of an RCT may vary widely from this model. So, one of those little quirks, we talk about transporting things. We go back to this potential list where maybe the Hanse Davion's got 148 jump ships, and you're going to move an entire regimental command, a medium-sized mech unit, and the supporting elements should probably take 20 or so drop ships, which means you're going to need a minimum of 5 to 7 jump ships to move 1 RCT. This grossly limits why or how much can be done. This also makes an argument in the game world why they don't, the massive invasion that takes place in House Liao and against House Kurita in the Fourth Succession War, it was such an aberration per se, because technically they shouldn't have had enough jump capacity to move that amount of manpower and machinery at the same time, let alone the logistics change, because it's not just that you're going to move your command, you're going to move your battle mech unit. You're not, it's not just moving these guys into the field and this guy's into the field, but you got their crews and their technical support and their field support and the office structure that runs that stuff and the supplies needed to keep them in the field. This is what cripples a lot of the clan efforts in their invasion of the inner sphere toward the end, because they didn't have a really good logistics mindset, and they expect to get in and win stuff instantaneously and with as little effort as possible and then move on. And that doesn't play out well in the inner sphere. So the truth is that they have to have a lot more jump ship capacity than what's the original game allowed for. And I don't think it's ever been, to my knowledge, addressed in any later format officially that I know of. I think it's just something that it's just a nitpicking thing for somebody like me who gets too deep into this stuff. I want to know why the nuts and bolts work the way they do. Anyway, regimental combat teams, march militias, and planetary guard. The second part of most houses is you have your frontline offensive forces. These are your elite units, your troubleshooting units, your rank and file, veteran and regular units that's often see movement. At least once a year they might shift a position. They're often called up to defend something, rush or rush somewhere to help put down a problem. Then you have your home defense plan units. And traditionally, that comes in two levels. You're going to have what we would consider our National Guard, their home guard. Our National Guard is much more robust and progressive. We have a tendency to ship them off into bigger conflicts to support the regular military. That's where the March militias and the Federated Suns apply. The March militias have their own areas of responsibility. They don't often leave that area, but they can be shifted around within that area of responsibility as needed. And it's not uncommon for these militia unit, these March militia units to be shipped out into an offensive role to support the frontline units, to provide extra firepower or manpower and so on and so forth. Then the home guards, which would be the literal planetary bound protectors. This is the last line of or the last line or the first line of defense, depending on how you look at it. In a lot of places, this is going to be the dregs. The worst equipment, the oldest equipment, the most poorly equipped, the most poorly maintained, things like this. But that doesn't always play out, because a lot of places, like the Federated Suns, as your units or your manpower age up, at some point they leave the service, but a lot of them still feel the wish or need or desire to be involved. So they join these planetary guard units and become them weekend warriors and stuff. Makes them very well trained, well educated veterans. And even though they may have substandard equipment by everybody else's standards, they make them pretty tenacious, and they get to know the local turf real well. Makes them pretty good fighters in some aspects. It can be pretty potent. So. But once again, and they tend to have heavily more on the infantry and armor units in planetary guard, because they're cheaper, right? And they're easier to produce. And that's important in this day and age. So when we talk about 110 frontline combat units that they can, or battle mech regiments, that there's probably close to 1,000 when you add the March militias and the planetary guards together. And in some cases, these planetary guard units are veteran enough and experienced enough that they can actually be shipped off in support roles for a bigger offensive. We see that happen in the Fourth Succession War. There's upside downsides to doing that, but once again, transportation becomes an issue and logistics becomes an issue, right? So the battle mechs of the Federated Suns, most of the battle mech regiments fall into categories such as heavy or light. The FFS tends to favor assigning the best possible mech orders to a regiment, no matter what class of mech they might pilot. Once the assignments are made, the regiment will be arranged into heavy and light battalions, companies, and lances. Results: the average Davion regiment tends to be lighter than its counterparts in other houses. Within the 78 battle mech regiments of the AFS are a vast number of different mech designs and variations. It once estimated every variation of every type of mech, from the Locust Model 1E to the Atlas Model RS, can be found among Hanse Davion regiments. Nevertheless, most Davion battle mech regiments consist of mainly of a handful of mech designs that are currently produced in the Federated Suns. So, like I said, you can pretty much any house is going to have everybody else's version of something somewhere in it. But whenever possible, for ease of logistics and repair and maintenance and training, you want to try to focus. Your mainline unit should have as much your homemade, your house-produced materials possible, because they're the ones you want to keep in the top form, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be the pointy end of the stick when you need to stab somebody with it. So aerospace forces, armored units, infantry units. Armored regiments are second only to battle mech regiments in firepower and speed in the AFS. The most armored regiments have a balance of highly mobile hover tanks and slower but far more deadly heavy tanks. Now, let's see. The infantry units are treated slightly better in the AFFS than in other realms, where they are usually considered a little more than guards set to police territory when by more glamorous units. Let's take that into account for a brief moment. We talk about combat in invasions and raids and things like this. Taking a planet, especially a heavily developed, heavily populated planet, from your neighbor as conquest is one thing, because you're going to bring in a military units that are going to go up against the key units there and defeat them. And the truth is, they don't. If you have a planet with 2 billion people on it, it should have a much bigger defense force than what's seen commonly in this game system. It's just what it is, but you would think that it would be much better defended world, that there would be, 50 in a planet with a billion plus population, there should be 50 to 100 battle or armor and infantry regiments on the planet, period. Perhaps even divisions worth of them. It might be 30 divisions worth. So you bringing in 300 or 400 mechs and tanks and maybe 1,000 infantry from somewhere else to take on that? Come on, really? The sheer number of weight and numbers alone should bury you, how good you are. But it just doesn't play well for the table in the game. So that's just kind of one of those things that we overlook. The other side of that is holding the ground. This is why infantry is so crucial to every house, because once you conquer a place, you take it, you got to keep it, and to keep it, you got to keep the people behaving themselves, or you won't be able to control it. If you can't control it, you might as well not be there. Simple as that. So you need to be able to bring enough infantry on the ground to show the flag. In some places, put up the presence. We talk about transportation issues again. So once again, how many jump ships would that take to bring in 20,000 troops? You're going to conquer a world that's got 1 billion with a B population, and you're only going to bring 1,000 troops. There's not enough of them there to wave the flag. You might control the idea is you control the critical key locations, the government, the house of government, the nobles, whatever, and then force them to hope the people behave themselves because you got them under control. Right. That's nitpicking on my part, right? I know. See, most RCTs carry equipment allows them to quickly construct fighter bases. The front line shoots earth movers flatten the ground so they're machining to lay down thick carpet of polyturf straightened by strips. Command post, usually van filled with communications equipment, sensing devices. Shelters for the fighters, ammunition, machine shops are also built in camouflage and massive stern so as not to immediately be visible from air. BTOLs, missile batteries, conventional variety craft are also stationed around these fighter bases. So on and so forth, going on and on. See, once again, we're talking, not only are you bringing if you're going on the offensive someplace, not only are you bringing your battle mechs and your tanks and your infantry and their vehicles along, and you're bringing your command and control units and all their vehicles and equipment along, you're bringing the field cooks and the cook units along, you're bringing a medical unit, and hopefully you're in the requirements that they require. You're also bringing engineering vehicles, unless you can acquire them locally, but if you have them ingrained into your unit, well, that takes more drop ships and more jump ships. Back to the jump ship equation, right? This is one of the reasons why mass combat and major invasions across borders have not gone on all the time through the succession wars, because every conflict has diminished that jump ship pool, made it harder and harder to move sufficient stuff around to matter, right? So, but they all work together, and they plan ahead, and they prepare for it. So we get into that, which makes them so potent of a military unit, or military. So deployment of their forces, which varies, et cetera. But here we got the current, as the 3025, the current location of all the main units and where they're at. We got our unit descriptions, the Davion Brigade of Guards, the Avalon Hussars, the Neblite Cavalry, Crucius Lancers, SETI Hussars, Chisholm's Raiders, Robinson Rangers, New Iverson Chasseurs, Argo Lancers, Capellan Dragoons. All right, just like most of the houses, the Federated Suns is not unlike. We have, like I said, within the house of these nobles. So I often equate them as being minor houses. So you have Hanse Davion and New Citrus, and so he's got some military forces that are under his control and respond to his command structure and are supported by his minor house. The Robinsons and Sandoval's, all these have got the same stuff. So then you got certain planets that have military units that are dedicated to that specific planet or are supported by that planet. Thus, they have their names like the Kittery Borders, the Argonne Borders, Castro Grenadiers, but they're under the command of the Federated Suns military, but there's still some convoluted command structure going on because they aren't always going to respond to House Davion's demand that they go do something. If their local house lord, the minor house lord, is in contention with or just paranoid enough not to want to see them leave. Then we got our march militias again. There's some cavalry and the training cadres. Like, not all houses, I've noticed, do this. To the Draconis Combine, the Federated Suns are common in this aspect that their training academies for their military field actual combat units for their trainees. Their senior graduates are going to go and spend some time in the field and actually get some possible action. So the College of Military Arts of the NAIS training cadre, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, the Albion training cadre, regional training battalions, and we got mercenary units. By far, of all the houses, the Federated Suns employ the most merc units, and they employ everything from lance size commands to multi-regimental commands and all kinds of capabilities and reliability factors, because the sheer vast size of the Federated Suns, they need every bit of resources they can get. So they employ these guys, and they treat them fairly well. They pay them fairly well. There's always some issues and contentions, and of course their capabilities and their how they're ranked and stuff like that, it plays a role in how well they're treated. But for the most part, Federated Suns treats its mercenaries pretty good. The Draconis Combine hires the least because they really don't like mercenaries and the whole concept of mercenaries. And when they do, those mercenary units tend to get the dirty end of the stick more often than not. Then and then the hierarchy goes up and down. So Free Worlds League probably is the next largest employer, followed by House Steiner and then Liao, but then that can switch depending on who's in charge and what their needs are at the given time. So that's not uncommon for most merc units to have served or been in the employ of multiple houses in their careers, and the occasional employment of ComStar, no less. Weapons industries. Federated Suns weapons industries are among the healthiest in the inner sphere, especially with firms such as Federated Boeing and Callan Weapons producing at full capacity, even devoting resources to developing new equipment. This is one of the things that sets the Federated Suns apart from most of the other houses, is not only do they have their industrial machine oiled and mostly functional, but they also are attempting to expand it and to build on it and actually produce new things. As of 3025, there's a handful of brand new mech designs that are starting to show up. House Liao introduces the Raven, which is a scout mech, and it's a damn good one. The Federated Suns developed the Hatchetman, which is a medium mech with quite aggressive capabilities, and it's a very good, solid design. And more importantly, it's an actual these are new designs, not something that's repurposed from a different design. So they actually not only have invested the time, effort, and engineering to design and build these things new, but they've developed the production capacity to produce them, which means they've either retool a factory, an old Starley factory, to produce something new, or they built a new line to do them to build them, which is an important factor because for better part of 150 years after the Second Succession War, halfway through the Second Succession War, most of that capability was diminished, if not completely lost. So this shows the initial steps of that rebirth of technology and innovation that's starting to kick up, right? So let's see. And like I said, production is like they estimate, and I think one of my first videos I made the mistake of saying it was about like 400 or 500 mechs a year per everybody, but for the most part, every house is producing anywhere between 300 and 500 new mechs a year. But that's when you look at the combat attrition and your fusion engine goes. Your core melts down, it's going to blow that damn thing apart. There's not going to be much left in the way of parts for it, so you're going to have to replace it. So production barely exceeds replacement needs for the military units. So the fact that they to add brand new units isn't common. It's not that easy to just say I'm going to add 10 more mech regents because I have to come up with 1,000 more machines or 500 machines to do that. That won't be going to replace missing and damaged and destroyed units. In existing units. It's easier to do that with tanks, which is one of the reasons the armor has been slowly outstripping or rapidly outstripping battle mechs for sheer numbers. But once again, it's tactics and style and philosophy that regulate the armor to its secondary role in most military mindset. So military education. Federated Suns responsibly plans stability and encourage promising young men and women to enter the military. These young people who show exceptional potential, either because they have scored high tests or given regularly by the AFS, or because their athletic abilities are offered scholarships by the plan's nobility and the government to attend the nearest accredited military academy. If the young person would like to join the AFFS but cannot voyage to an academy because of lack of money, he may join the ROTC Corps and become a reserve officer with local planetary guard units. If his career in the PUG is notable, officer might be asked to join the frontline unit of the AFFS. See, so we got our military academies, colleges, Sakara, Warriors Hall, Battle Academy, Robinson, Warcon, blah, blah, blah. Got our medals, orders, education, culture, and the arts. It's always amazed me how a government will instantly respond to a world's calls for arms, yet become suddenly deaf and dumb when the same world makes a plea for teachers. If nothing else, it gives us a good idea where Prince Davion's priorities lie. All right, that's from his criticism of the Davion government education policy. Once again, education took a hit from the Succession Wars. First Succession War and then the Second Succession War basically finished it off. It was the average education on the local level rarely exceeds sixth grade, eighth grade, and that in part on the Backwater Worlds is because of needs and necessity and the lack of education resources. More advanced resources or economies, colleges, universities, trade schools exist, but you find these on the more developed planets, the more heavily populated planets, for good reason. And once again, there's just only so many slots to go around. So one of the things that they try to do is they call these vagabond schools. They set up basically a couple old jump ships and turn them into floating colleges, so to speak, and then kind of bounce them around. And they've had some success with that. Universities, colleges, there's not been a huge growth on any of the houses in promoting new education opportunities, new universities, new colleges, and that's kind of an anathemism to development of any society as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's a failure on the part of this being obsessed with this constant conflict and skullduggery that all the houses are weak in the education department, which is dangerous and so in the least, to say the least. The arts, daily life. The sheer immensity of Federated Suns and uneven distribution of technology are the main factors which are affecting the quality of life of the ordinary citizens of House Davion. The average citizen of one of the Golden Five or any of the other advanced technology worlds would surely enjoy a life of relative comfort and leisure. Generally well educated, politically conservative, though personally tolerant of differing opinions. The typical family has one child and is likely to scandalize his parents. Most parents are educated enough to understand this is no more than a for the people living on one of the Skid Row worlds in the outback of the realm, the situation is drastically different. On such planets, life is generally tough, mean, and often damnably short. Education usually means knowing how to maintain a 500-year-old tractor with an internal combustion engine and keeping it fueled with the methane from the owner has obtained from animal dung. Education on these worlds may also mean knowing how to field a slug-throwing rifle and where to find the nearest bunker in case of an enemy raid. Such an individual's idea of fine art might be the sight of a Korean mech exploding as it falls to the ground on his neighbor's land instead of his. He might also think of art as Thomas Jones and his banjo, a hot dance in a dark barn, or a rough kiss and a grope with a woman from the next town. Muscles are not a status symbol or an expression of physical beauty as on the wealthier worlds, but a necessity for sheer survival. On such less developed worlds, a man's political views tend to be limited to the idea of protecting oneself and trusting no one. Families average 10 children who will often work the fields or the mines alongside their parents. It just gives you this wide disparity amongst the Federated Suns. Federated Suns can be a powerhouse and can be much bigger and better and more powerful than it is, but it's hamstrung in a large part because of its poor education and its lack of economic resources to boost up these poor worlds. And the disparity factor of a planet, 500 planets, there's probably 400 of them that fall into the Skid Row category. It goes on about it. Talk about public media, social problems. Major problem facing many of the society's Federated Suns and the cause of all lesser problems is the enormous span of the realm and its vast distances separating its worlds. The problem is so great that the government is unable, despite its claims to the contrary, to fully provide the services that its member planets require. Military protection is probably the only service that people in the distant worlds can count on receiving relatively quickly from central government. The list of related problems is a long one. For the outback worlds, the poverty is severe, especially on those planets not serviced by trading companies. Hardships can be almost unbearable. Prejudice, whether it be religious, race, or class, is another problem haunting the poor and distant worlds. So members of the Federated Suns, many outback planets must also cope with a crushing sense of isolation. To these citizens, New Avalon is a place more mythical than real. When one of these isolated worlds is in the midst of rioting or threatening it by a tyrant's rule, it's ludicrous for the people to imagine there's a mere speck in the nighttime sky that can send help across hundreds of light years in time to save the day. And though the Davion government is concerned for the welfare of its more remote government worlds, many people suffer under the burden of violence and ignorance. ComStar and Federated Suns, social economics. Once again, you get the drift. And that brings us once again back to my nitpicking about the lack of jump ship. The supposedly 2,000 odd jump ships split amongst all the houses in the periphery. Okay, the lion's share of people in the Intersphere don't travel. You rarely leave your home. You rarely go more than 20 miles from your home. That's typical on Earth today. Majority of people don't go very far. Maybe once in their lifetime they might take a trip somewhere else, but it's rare and far fewer by sheer number travel by plane. But even if 1% of 1% of 1% of the vast population of the Intersphere does travel between worlds, well, gee, according to that jump ship book over there, most the biggest passenger liners only carry 300 or 400 people. So, hello, in order to move millions of travelers around the inner sphere, you would have to have many more jump ships than what they're suggesting that are available. Otherwise, almost the only people, it would be very rare for somebody to travel between worlds, and it would be exceptionally, just exceptional. And yet there are plenty of places like Solaris and places in the ministry of Canopus that imply that trade is their lifeblood, or tourism is their lifeblood. It means thousands, if not millions of people travel. Numbers just don't crunch. Social economics. The Federated Suns now as well developed some other successor states. Its sheer size makes it a potential economic powerhouse. Recent events have shown that Prince Davion is eager to exert economic muscle of the funds. Despite political and emotional hindrances, this wishes are fulfilled as possible. The growth of Federated Suns economy will usher in a new social economic order of the intersphere. Whether that bodes good or ill for ComStar remains to be seen. Resources and distances. Suns is the largest, most planet-rich of the 5 successor states, with 500 inhabited star systems, many with 2 or 3 worlds and dozens of lesser star systems. All that prevents Hanse Davion exploiting its natural resources. It's the immensity of the realm makes it difficult, sometimes impossible, to quickly transport resources from distant worlds in need of them. While the other successor states suffer from this problem, it's more acute than the Federated Suns. Those of the Davion realm is the largest commercial transport fleet in the intersphere. Even in its many trading companies, independent haulers are barely enough to keep the realm fed. Pressure to deliver essentials to hungry and thirsty worlds make it desirable for the shipping companies to establish trade routes outside the realm, yet too much contact with the other successor states are discouraged. Right? Government attitudes and regulations, consumer goods, political aims of the economy, various companies and their CEOs, personalities, trade with the other succession states. We've covered quite a bit of that already. We're getting down there. So, different people, different planets, so on and so forth. Here's our fold-out map. All right. Name of all the planets and their coordinates. And I guarantee they're not all on that map. I've looked. Right? So, there you go, my friends. That is Hanse Davion and the Federated Suns. Till next time, you guys have a great weekend.